What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall market. And break down some big news that came out involving Tesla that's helping the share price push, not to mention new developments on the charts. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. Anyways, let's talk about what's happening with this market. So, as far as the market's going, the large majority of stocks are in the green, looking at SPY, the QQQ, Tesla, and many others. But at the same time, I just want to say that Tesla was outperforming because Tesla's up about 9.8% because we got some big news. So I'm going to break down what the news is saying so far, what's happening to President Trump and his updates involving his tariffs, and why next week is going to be very crazy as we have lots of new developments coming out when it comes to big data and earnings. But we're going to first talk about some key levels. So I just want to say that Tesla has the support around this 275 area, but notice that there's a very tough resistance between 285 and 292. Tesla's got one, two, three rejections all the way up to about that 292 area. So we're going to be watching to see if Tesla could go a bit higher and watch what kind of reaction we get here. If we see some kind of like push here, then if it comes back down towards this 270 area to retest our 200 EMA. And we'll see if it bounces off that or not. But I just want to give you guys a heads up about that, especially as the market's moving the way it is. So I'll talk more about Tesla in just a minute and what I think is going to pan out for the stocks out there. But let's first talk about some news that's come out. So some rule changes were announced by the Trump administration this week that could allow automakers to report fewer crashes involving FSD. With Tesla potentially emerging as the main beneficiary, that's some big news that's come out. The Transportation Department announced on Thursday that it's no longer going to require automakers to report certain kinds of non-fatal crashes, but the exemption will apply only to partial self-driving vehicles using so-called level 2 systems, the kind that Tesla deploys. If Tesla and other automakers are required to report fewer crashes into a national database, that could make it a bit more difficult for regulators to catch equipment defects, for the public to access information about the overall safety. But despite this, Tesla insists that they're going to do whatever is necessary to make their cars as safe as possible. Now, Elon Musk and the team are saying that they don't want to just throw FSD out there and just make it out there and like force everyone to accept it. What they're going to do is they're just going to stick like one toe in the water, then they're going to put multiple toes before they start putting in an entire foot. So their main goal is just launch FSD in like some parts of Texas, some parts of California, have them test FSD, improve it, and as it gets safer and safer, slowly expand it to more regions. Now, that implies that most likely FSD will be a lot safer, especially as years progress. But the main thing about that is that this will help them deploy more tests and more robotaxis to make profits at least quicker, according to lots of different reports. So this would help Tesla build more revenue faster. This is getting investors very excited. This is beneficial news for them, but as far as the public safety goes, I just want to say that although, yes, it is somewhat true that the HTSA may not be involved in as many reports where there could be some kind of issues with FSD, and maybe make it a little bit more difficult for them to find defects. But at the same time, it's going to benefit Tesla because it helps them kind of like test a lot more on the streets and such. And then simultaneously, I wouldn't necessarily say that this means that FSD is going to be more dangerous, because you have to understand that the regulations aren't the only thing that make it safe. They're also going to be doing a lot of testing and such on the sidelines. So there's two ways to look at it. Hopefully, Tesla tries to launch it as safely as possible, get as many vehicles out there with as much testing as possible, and then they try to avoid a lot of issues. I do believe that FSD is improving. It's not perfect, but it's definitely improving. And I just want to say that they're not just going to launch it out there in every part of the US. They're just slowly launching it in places here and there, slowly, slowly, slowly. And then we'll see what ends up happening with the data. They still have to report fatalities and most other accidents, but not every single one, of course, will have to be reported if it's just like a minor. So we'll see what ends up happening, and let's just hope for the best nonetheless. But if anything, as a Tesla investor, this is technically good news for Tesla, since it does help them deploy things quicker and less regulation does benefit them. So this is technically good news for the share price, and we'll see if this ends up holding us up as time goes on. Now, to add on to this, next week is going to be very big because it's going to be the last week of April until we start May. On Monday, we have very minor bill auction data coming out. On Tuesday, we just have JOLTS job openings and job quits reports. On Wednesday, we have PCE data, which might cause some volatility alongside employment numbers. On Thursday, we have the ISM manufacturing reports, which may cause volatility. And on Friday, we have more manufacturing numbers and then unemployment numbers causing even more volatility. So there's going to be quite a bit of data, especially between Tuesday and Friday. And then when it comes to the earnings calendar, we have Domino's Pizza announcing earnings on Monday. On Tuesday, we have SoFi and PayPal. On Wednesday, we have Microsoft and Meta. Then on Thursday, we have Amazon and Apple all announcing earnings. So just keep that in mind. When it comes to President Trump, there was some news that came out. So I just want to make it very clear that before we had Chinese regulators saying that the US is not in talks with negotiations when it comes to tariffs. But President Trump said today that actually the leader known as Xi of China called him and they're discussing trade and tariffs. So that's some good news so far. That's helping the market to some extent. So we'll just have to see how this continues as time goes on. But that's something that's worth mentioning. So with that being said, and with this coming out, I want to make it very clear that we'll be watching to see what kind of reactions we get. But President Trump is saying that the negotiations are continuing and that he's very confident a deal will come in the future. Now, we don't have any specific dates, and there are some headlines saying there's going to be exemptions coming for automakers. Trump will eventually decrease the tariffs on China, this and that. Nothing is confirmed from the White House yet, so we'll just have to see what happens over the weekend, what President Trump and his team end up saying. On top of this, Apple's planning to move production of its iPhones primarily to India. They want India to be used to source more than 60 million iPhones annually in the US by the end of 2026. That's a big plan that's coming out, which is benefiting them. So keep that in mind, at least for the time being. So as far as Tesla's going, keep in mind we have this tough resistance near 292, and every time we're hitting this, we have rejected so far. So we might see a little pop, but then I do think we might return back down to like the 270s just temporarily. And as long as we make a higher low, we could continue to push later on like this. But keep in mind, I do see a move like this coming where we try to push a bit higher to 292, and we'll see if Tesla gets a rejection or not. If we break 292, we'll be just pushing to 300. But I'm watching that resistance because it's very tough. And every time we hit this, we have seen some kind of rejection on Tesla. So be very, very mindful of that, especially if the market ends up slowing down. I also say that because SPY has a rising wedge. That makes me a little concerned that we might get a small pullback. We might slowly try to get very close to that 555 area, and we'll see if we form some kind of top soon to kind of pull back like this to retest these EMAs. So I'll be watching that very closely as the most likely possibility. So make sure you guys keep that in mind, as that's going to be very key for how we end up moving. If we break 555, we're looking for 560 and 565 as our targets. Like I said before, we might go a little bit higher for 555 to 560, but then this wedge might pan out, taking us back down to 535. And then for the QQQ, we push very nicely to about this 473 area. It could go a little bit higher, but then we're going to be watching to see if we end up coming back down towards 460 to 454 towards our EMAs. For the IWM, we're bullish. We're trying to push for basically 196. We might get close to 198 to 200, but then we'll see if we form a top there and turn back down towards our EMAs around 189. So look for a little bit more upside towards 198, and we'll see what the reaction happens to be like. For ES, we're technically looking bullish, making higher lows. As you can tell, we're just making higher highs and higher lows like this. And this may continue to do this as time goes on, especially as we have this gap over here to fill. So it is possible we go a little bit higher off this wedge, but be very careful with this rising wedge forming. This might take us back down, especially as we have this gap down here to fill, back down to like the 5,300 area. And we'll see if we get a bounce off that or not to establish a higher low. But I do think this might actually drag ES down. I do think we might be coming down to fill this gap soon. So keep that in mind. For NQ, I think the same thing is going on. We have a gap to fill around 18,300. We might try to push closer to the higher 19,000s, but then we might eventually come back down, especially as we have this gap fill all the way down here around 18,300. So there might be some kind of pullback move coming very soon. Bitcoin is bullish, forming a nice accumulation, but we're going to be looking at 95 to 96,000. It's a risky level to see if we break it or not to push towards 100,000. Might come a little bit short and retest 93,000, so just keep that in mind. For Tesla, it's a bit more bullish. It's forming a nice wedge right, not a wedge, a range right here. We might go a little bit higher. Might be retesting 292 to 300, but then we'll be looking to see if we end up retesting 270. So keep that in mind. For Nvda, we pumped very, very nicely to this resistance. Very, very nice looking inverse head and shoulders like structure, left shoulder ahead and the right shoulder. And this might be trying to push back up to about this 113 area right here. And we'll see if we get some kind of big rejection near 108. So keep that in mind. For Aapl, Apple's making higher lows here, so be very, very careful. So watch 208 and then eventually the 210 area as a resistance. So we'll see what kind of reaction we get near 210 or if we push to like 213. And we'll see if we get a rejection from there to retest these EMAs like this. I'll be watching that very closely, especially because if you go to like our daily chart on Apple like this, we do have this big gap here. We have some gaps to fill. So I'll be watching to see if we form a top near 200. And if we end up coming back down to fill some of these gaps soon. For Coinbase, we're technically bullish, but my problem is that there's a tough resistance near 220. And also, when you look at the 4 hour time frame near that 215 area, we're going to see what kind of reaction we get. So we might push for like 212 to 215, and we'll see if we end up turning back down to 200. Watch that very closely. Amazon's looking bullish. We might be pushing back up to 190 to 193, and we'll see what kind of move we make if we end up turning back down to about 182. For Meta, it's possible we go a little bit higher to retest 560 or so, but I'd be very careful the closer we get to like 575. 560 might be tested. I'll see if we go a little higher from there, but then I'll be looking to see if we get a retest of the support. Keep in mind that the daily chart on Meta also has this giant gap down here, and once we pivot, we will be coming down to fill some of these gaps. We need to see where it forms a top, though. Do we top at like 556? Do we go up to 560? And then we'll see if it ends up turning to fill this gap like this before it tries to bounce again. I'll be watching that very closely. On Microsoft, there's a big gap down here as well. Now, keep in mind, Microsoft also has a rising wedge. So it is possible that we continue to respect this for some time to get closer to 400. Then we eventually turn down to start filling some of these gaps. So keep that in mind. Google's starting to reject here. We want to see if we can hold 165 or not. If not, we're looking for 157. I also want to add that the VIX might dip a little bit more, but we do have a falling wedge on the VIX. This might dip a bit more towards 22, but I do think it's going to form a bottom soon near 22 to 24. And this will break out to fill this gap up here, pushing back up to 36 as the market gets a rug pull. So what's my prediction? The market goes a little bit higher. Yes, it can. Tesla could retest 292 or so, but there might be a little bit of a pullback coming looking at the setups. And we want to be very, very careful, especially as we start the new month. This could be driven by tariff news involving President Trump. We'll see what he ends up saying. We'll see what his team ends up announcing. This could be driven by some data that's coming out. We have manufacturing numbers and things like that. And also by earnings. We'll see how earnings go when it comes to PayPal, Microsoft, Meta, and Alphabet. Not to mention, sorry, not Alphabet. I meant Amazon and also Apple. So watch and see what ends up happening. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. So please have a good rest of your day. I want to give you guys one more update about my health. As a reminder, I'm doing well. I've improved a lot. My cough and flu are gone for the most part, except I am getting a lot of headaches. So I'll see if I take a break tomorrow, if I upload a video or not. I'll try my best to do that. But until I see you guys again, I thank you all so much for listening. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll be back very soon with another update. Have a good day, have a good night, and peace out.